this hour, like we teased, we got another interview. Shout out to Newsday Sports for giving us this access. We talked to Steve Popper, the Knicks columnist, yesterday. And now we're going to talk to the Nets columnist Evan Barnes. Now, Barnes joined Newsday just this year in 2023 after previously working for Memphis, the Commercial Appeal, the Los Angeles Daily News, the Torrance Daily Breeze, and the Los Angeles Sentinel. Evan, what's going on?
Hey, not much, man. Glad you guys had me on, so thank you.
I appreciate you joining the program, man. Listen, obviously you're the Nets columnist, just joined Newsday. First off, I got to say, how are you finding working in New York City, albeit for the Nets?
You know what? It's pretty good, man. I mean, New York is, if you had said to me 5 years ago I'd be working in New York, I wouldn't have believed it, but it is pretty cool. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I love being here. It's an experience. I've already done a little bit of things here, which is great for work, but now I'm ready to dive into why I got here. And tomorrow, it all starts.
Absolutely. Can't wait to see how the Knicks look in terms of New York sports, and the Nets as well, because people sleep on the Nets because they're not particularly New York's flavor in terms of basketball for the most part, but there are a lot of interesting storylines on this team.
There's no quote wow factor on this team.
Yeah, there's not, but I mean, listen, when you talk storylines with the Nets, you obviously go right to Ben Simmons, and that's where we're going to start. Listen, from everything you're hearing out of Nets camp, he looks good, he looks motivated, he's in a good mental space. So what have you been hearing about Ben Simmons in terms of his mindset coming into the season, and what do you expect out of him?
Well, it's funny. I mean, Ben has said all the right things. Like, he's healthy, he wants to play point guard, he's got something to prove to people who, may have forgotten what he's been like. And it's really going to be fun. I think it's going to be the biggest story around the team is, how does Ben Simmons look? How does he mesh in with Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson? Because really they only played, I think, part of 3 games together before he was shut down. So really, that's the biggest story around the team is a lot of mystery around Ben Simmons and how he fits in. But in preseason, what we saw was he looks healthy, he's running the floor very well, he's finding guys in the open corner. When he gets out of transition, he still has the speed. He even joked with that he still has his athleticism, which, if that's great, that's great. But what you expect with him is he's going to find guys, he's going to defend really well. The only question now is going to be, I think, how much of a scorer will he be? I wrote something this week where he hasn't really been scoring as much, but the Nets aren't worried about it, so that's going to be the only question. But other than that, he looks like himself again, and he's playing like it, at least what we've seen in preseason.
Did look very impressive in preseason. Now, with the Nets as well, you have the first full year for Jacque Vaughn. He shed that interim label after last season. Took the team, he had a lot to deal with last year. Obviously, he had Steve Nash as his boss, pretty much. He went from subordinate to head coach after Steve Nash got fired, 10 games into the season or less than that. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving gone. You're kind of given this makeshift group on the fly, but he did decently with it to get the Nets to, the playoffs. So what do you see from Jacque Vaughn, his first full year with the Nets as coach this season?
Well, I think what helps is when it's your first training camp, you get to implement everything. Like, they really have to kind of keep going last year with what they started with. They couldn't really change too much. Like, when you're in an NBA season, you don't have time to really practice as much. You got shoot rounds, you got film sessions. When I was with the Grizzlies, I really learned that because you don't really get the chance to practice as much. So they kind of have to keep doing what Steve Nash did last year, and even talk about how Mikal Bridges, when he got here, they basically ran the same plays that Kevin Durant and Kyrie ran, with isolation plays. So really with Jacque, I think what you're going to see is the identity of this team. It gets to be formed a little bit, what they're going to be under Jacque, what Jacque wants to do. And I think for me, it seems like with all we've heard, this is going to try to be a very defense-oriented Nets team. They're going to try to be a team that relies on defense. And we're going to see how that looks. Because in the preseason, it didn't look as locked down as we thought. But then again, You could say that, they didn't play, starters minutes. But in those first halves, when the starters played a lot, they didn't look like a lockdown unit. So I think we're going to, the jury's still out on Jacque Vaughn, but I think having the preseason, having the training camp to figure things out, it's going to be an asset for him to kind of like put his fingerprints on what these Nets are going to be instead of just kind of, keeping the same thing as usual last year.
Newsday Sports Nets columnist Evan Barnes joining WHPC Sports Talk. You bring up Mikal Bridges. Now, he comes over from Phoenix, and I think most people saw him as just a high-level role player. He could get off points when he needed to, but people didn't really see 3-and-D prototype, but you didn't really see what he did in Brooklyn after the trade deadline coming, where he averaged upwards of 25 points per game. So Mikal Bridges, he's on the map now. I'm interested to see NBA players as a whole, once they have that first real taste of real success, all-star type level success, how they handle extra attention the coming year. So can you see a superstar, dare I say, leap from Mikal Bridges coming this season?
Well, one thing about me is I use superstar very carefully. Like, it's a very careful term that I don't use for everyone in the NBA, because you can't have 15 superstars. You maybe have like 10 or 5 to 10 at a given time. So I'm very iffy on that, because to me a superstar is somebody that everybody knows. I'll give you an example. Beyonce and Taylor Swift are probably the only two, and Adele. They're probably the 3 biggest superstars in music right now.
Absolutely.
This summer proved it with Beyonce and Taylor Swift tours. So bringing back to Mikal Bridges, can he make a superstar leap? I don't know if he can get into that top 10, but can he take a leap this year? I think he can, because he'll have the chance to really kind of figure out what he wants to do, what the Nets can do with him. And I think you're talking about somebody who showed out with Team USA, who had that great game against Italy, had that great buzzer-beating three-pointer against Canada, is a very, likable person. The Nets have empowered him to lead. I have a story up right now about how at Villanova, Jay Wright basically said he was one of the smartest players he coached, and that helped him lead even when he wasn't the number one option. So I think with Mikal Bridges, you're going to hear all-star talk before tomorrow. You may hear it during the season if he lives up to that potential, but if he does, I think it's going to be great for him, showing that he's way more than just this role player who got the opportunity. He's a much better player than what he showed, and I think that possibility is exciting to see.
Absolutely. Mikal Bridges averaged 17 points per game with Phoenix last year. When he came to Brooklyn, averaged 26 points per game.
Sounds like all NBA numbers to me.
Yeah.
Sounds like all NBA numbers.
See how he does. WHPC Sports Talk live from Roosevelt Field Mall, once again celebrating NCC Homecoming and Alumni Week. Talking to Nets columnist for Newsday Sports, Evan Barnes, right now. Listen, you brought up Memphis, and obviously you just came off working for them last season. And they're such an interesting team with an interesting outlook this season, because while they have Marcus Smart now, they bring over Derrick Rose, you lose Tyus Jones, and you get Ja Morant, because of his own doing, suspended for the first 25 games. And that's over a quarter of the season. That's no small amount. So when you look at the Grizzlies and your knowledge of this team and the personalities and their coach, what's their outlook this season in terms of Western Conference success?
Sure. Well, before Monday, I would have said there's still a chance they could be a top 4 team in the West, just because when Ja comes back, they can make a push. And I think this is going to be a year that a lot of people get to know who Desmond Bane is, as not just one of the best shooters in the league, but one of the best well-rounded young players in the league. But they just lost Steven Adams, their center, for the entire year. He's going to get knee surgery for a ligament sprain, a PCL, I believe. So now their outlook is a little bit tricky, because Steven Adams, really the last 2 years, helped open up that offense so much, even as Ja Morant blossomed into a superstar. And now you're going to have to replace not just, Steven Adams rebounding on offense, because he's one of the best offensive rebounders in the league. As a screener, he gets guys open. As a presence, he opens up the paint for Ja and Jaren Jackson. So it's really, really difficult to see how they're going to survive this. And one of their best reserve players, Brandon Clark, is going to miss some serious time with an Achilles injury. But I think they're going to make the playoffs. It's just a matter of how will they look getting there. And then when Ja comes back, that's when we start judging this team.
Ja Morant, obviously 25 games once again missed, but we know he's a superstar talent. when he's on the court. It's crazy, guys. I saw John Morant, who was All NBA, high up there a couple years ago. He gets suspended. Yeah, it's off the court stuff, but now we're saying guys like the Aaron Fox who's better than him. I mean, it's a debate, I guess, but I don't know about that. We'll see how. I don't know. Evan. I don't know.
I'll say this. It's funny how actions have consequences, right? Obviously, some guys are going to talk up more because of what happened to John. But let's be clear: when John Morant's healthy, he's a top 15 player in this league. It's not a debate. He just has to, make sure he stays out of trouble. But when he's on the court, we know what he can do. The only question I have with him is, can he improve as a jump shooter to give him more variety? But there's no question. John Morant, when healthy, is a top 15 at best, 20 at worst player in the league.
Absolutely, without question. And one question I definitely wanted to get to, and Devin alluded to it in the prior hour, this NBA rest policy. Now, obviously, the Grizzlies, I don't know if they're going to really look to rest players depending or obviously going off of what they just lost for a significant amount of time. A lot of key players, but obviously the rest policy. Can you tell us more about that? Because I feel like a lot of NBA fans know it's out there now, but they haven't really looked into the inner details of it. Obviously, I think the Clippers are the poster children for it. But can you add more insight to the new rest policy this offseason?
Yeah, sure. So basically what it says is that, and I have to remind myself because obviously the rest policy is so new this year, but basically teams are not going to be able to rest multiple stars in the same game based on their prestige, if you will. So, for example, teams will not be able to rest, guys who made the All-Star team or were All-NBA team in the previous 3 seasons based on rest. Now, if they're legitimately hurt, they're legitimately hurt. But it's basically saying that you cannot rest multiple star players in in nationally televised games or high-profile games. Now, you have to ask yourself 2 questions with this. Why is the league doing this? Well, load management is a real thing. Let's be clear. Teams are doing a better job managing the health of their players. They have performance teams. There's a lot of data that says that you want to manage guys' health so that they're healthy for the postseason. The NBA said that data was a little bit suspect. I question that because what's factoring this is probably the role of gambling. Gambling is playing a big role in this. And let's be honest, if you're a fan and you want to see your favorite player, it's getting harder to predict that, especially on back-to-backs or whatnot. So that's kind of what this is all about. I think gambling is playing a big role in this. I think the new TV deal that the NBA is expected to get next year is playing a big role because advertisers saying, "Hey, we want to get an investment on our money here." But I think it's also going to be interesting to see how teams manage. Let's take the Nets, for example. Mikal Bridges, he hasn't missed a game his entire career. You're not going to see him rest. But and the only person on the Nets who's eligible for this, by the way, is Ben Simmons. I'm pretty sure Ben Simmons, if he's full go, the Nets are going to be smart with managing him. And Cam Johnson, too. Cam Johnson will probably be managed a little bit closely because he's just coming back from an injury. So it's going to be really different from team to team. I don't think Nets fans are going to really worry about it. I don't think the Knicks are going to worry about it. We know how Tom Thibodeau loves not to rest his players. The Grizzlies have been a very cautious team with injuries, so you may see how they have to manage things a little bit, especially when Jacque gets back. But overall, I'm going to be really curious how this works because teams are still going to find ways to rest their guys. But I think the message is clear. Advertisers, gambling, they've got to be more ethical stars playing, and teams have to play ball. But also we have to understand that it's teams who are affecting this more than the players not wanting to play.
I'm happy you brought up the gambling angle, too, because for a long time, fans have been upset about this. But if you mess with the NBA's money, that's when you're going to start to see a lot of changes. So obviously, like you said, Evan, a lot of moving parts with that. But I'm sure fans are, for the most part, happy with it. They want to see the stars play if they can. But, like you said, coaches and organizations, they're going to find a way around it like they always do, find the loopholes. Once again, Newsday Sports Nets columnist Evan Barnes. Before we let you go, Evan, I asked your colleague Steve Popper covering the Knicks yesterday. I asked him where the Knicks would sort of finish in the Eastern Conference, what their ceiling was. I'm going to ask you the same thing with Brooklyn. With this team right now, a lot of interesting, solid pieces. Jacque Vaughn, once again, first full year as coach. Where do you see this team finishing in the Eastern Conference, the Brooklyn Nets?
Well, it's funny you ask. I did write this at Newsday.com. You can read more about my prediction. I think they're going to be hovering around that play-in tournament range.
Okay.
I think we saw last year with Mikal Bridges, the Nets were a sub-500 team. With Ben Simmons, can that change? It really is going to depend on him. I think he raises the floor of this team if he can play at a high level again. But I also think that the Nets, there are questions with rebounding. There's questions with their bench scoring. There's just question on who's going to be a go-to guy besides Bridges who can get their own shot. And I think they're probably going to be hovering around the play-in tournament, maybe the 6th seed. So I think that I have them finishing 40 and 42, possibly reaching the play-in tournament, maybe at best in that 6th seed, but I don't see them being higher than the 6th, especially with the East being loaded as it is.
Interesting. I think I'm curious to know how Nets fans would feel about that, but that's good insight from the man who knows the Brooklyn Nets the best this season. Once again, Newsday Sports Nets columnist Evan Barnes. We're very pleased and happy you were able to join WHPC Sports Talk today, man. We appreciate it.
Hey, appreciate you guys for having me on anytime.
Absolutely. What y'all think? Brooklyn Nets, how do y'all, compared to Evan, see this team finishing real quick? He says 40 and 42 around the play-in tournament. I think that's about where most people have them at. Corey's making a face. You disagree?
Who got to make them play it? I don't.
What you
got lower or higher?
I don't got to make the playoffs.
At all?
At all.
You don't see them finishing top 10?
11 seed or 15? 11 through 15, that's where you see this team?
A lottery team.
Lottery team.
Really?
Yeah. Because you gotta understand, people, taking the fact that they had an okay season last year, they had a head start from Kevin Durant and Kyrie.
Absolutely.
They played at a 35-win pace after the Kevin Durant trade and Kyrie Irving trade.
But with the roster of, let's say, Ben Simmons succeeds and is starting at point guard, Ben Simmons, Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nicholas Claxton, with the bench that they do have, that's a lottery team?
Yeah, that's a lottery team.
After Mikal Bridges, like Josh just said, dropped, I think it was 26 since joining the Nets. That's a lottery.
That's a lottery team.
This is the first semi-questionable take from Corey I'm not entirely mad at. Because like Evan just noted, it's a lot of moving parts with this team. You have Ben Simmons. You don't know what you're going to get out of Ben Simmons. He's the ultimate wild card.
And then I just think that when you look at like teams at that bottom tier, yeah, I believe they're better than the Wizards. I believe the Nets might be better than the Wizards.
The pool party? Really?
I think like where they want to be is in that same realm of the Bulls. Where the Bulls.
Oh, mid.
If the Bulls feel like if the Bulls can play to their top level, they could be a play-in team.